Okay, let's unpack this. When the global conversation turns to climate change, one institution's reports, they're cited constantly, aren't they, as the absolute scientific truth?
Yeah, the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change.
Exactly.
And, for anyone really, whether you're a world leader, maybe a scientist, or honestly just someone trying to figure out the urgency of it all,
Uh-huh.
the IPCC's assessment reports, they really are the scientific gold standard. But our mission here today, well, it's to give you a proper deep dive.
Right. We want to go beyond just the headlines.
Precisely. To understand the incredibly complex process behind it all, the actual architecture, the meticulous checks and balances. And yeah, let's be honest, the political high wire act, too. That whole thing that transforms thousands and thousands of scientific papers into this one universally recognized, often pretty stark conclusion about, well, the state of our planet.
So we're going to try and give you the essential knowledge you need to interpret these reports fully. We want you to understand not just what the IPCC says, but why its findings hold such immense global authority. And also, crucially, where those political pressures, the ones inherent in its structure, actually emerge.
It's really important to start right at the beginning with its foundation. The IPCC was set up back in 1988.
Wow, so it's been around a while, over 3 decades.
Yeah, well over 3 decades. And it was co-founded by 2 major UN organizations, the World Meteorological Organization, the WMO, and the UN Environment Program, UNEP.
Okay.
And its job, its mandate, it's very focused. And it's political, actually. It's to provide governments at all levels with scientific information that they can use to develop climate policies. That's the official line.
That dual nature, science supporting policy, that feels like the critical friction point we need to keep coming back to in this deep dive, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
It's not just some independent science lab operating in isolation. It's an intergovernmental body.
That is the absolute key to understanding everything about the IPCC. It is, at the same time, a scientific assessment body and an organization governed by 195 member states.
Actual countries.
Literally sovereign countries, yes. And they vote on its structure, its procedures, its budget. The reports themselves have to achieve consensus agreement from those governments.
Wow.
So this merging, this kind of blend of rigorous science with global diplomacy, well, that's the source of the IPCC's unique power. But it's also the source of its most intense controversies.
And we should probably stress a really critical ground rule right up front, shouldn't we?
Yeah.
The IPCC doesn't actually do its own original research. It's a synthesizer, not a discoverer.
Absolutely. That's fundamental. The IPCC isn't running its own supercomputers to model future warming, or sending out expeditions to measure ice sheets. Nothing like that.
Right.
Its function is to objectively and comprehensively assess and synthesize the existing published body of global scientific literature.
So we're talking thousands of pages.
Oh, thousands upon thousands. Peer-reviewed papers on natural systems, economic models, social impacts, potential ways to respond, the whole gamut. And this massive review and compilation process, it involves literally thousands of scientists working voluntarily.
Voluntarily.
Yes. Which is why it's often been called, quite rightly, the biggest peer review process in the scientific community. It's enormous.
Okay, so if the IPCC is this huge scientific assessment engine, let's look under the hood a bit. How is it actually structured?
Well, it maintains a relatively small secretariat, actually, based in Geneva, Switzerland, hosted by the WMO, and it operates on a very highly structured assessment cycle.
A cycle. How long does that take?
Typically, it runs for about 6 to 7 years.
6 or 7 years. That sounds slow.
It is slow, and that's by design, really. It's
Yeah.
meant to ensure comprehensive coverage of all the relevant science. But yeah, that rigidity, it definitely impacts how quickly new science feeds into policy discussions.
If one cycle finishes and the next one starts.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
The completion of one massive assessment report, or AR, basically triggers the start of the next cycle. We just recently finished the 6th assessment report, AR6, and we're now operating within the 7th assessment cycle, which officially kicked off in 2023. So that timeline, it really dictates when new scientific findings can formally enter this authoritative global discourse.
And who's actually in charge? Who governs this whole thing?
The ultimate governing body is known simply as the panel.
The panel.
And this consists of representatives, they might be diplomatic appointees, technical experts, sometimes scientific advisors from all 195 member governments.
All 195 UN members.
Essentially, yes, the member states. And they meet in a plenary session, usually about twice a year.
And what does the panel do?
Their authority within the organization is, well, absolute. They control the budget, they approve the work program for the next cycle, they set the procedural rules, and most crucially, they formally accept and approve the reports.
Ah, so that's where the governmental oversight really kicks in.
Exactly, that's the primary point.
No.
Now, below the panel, there's the Bureau. The Bureau members are elected, and they provide the technical and scientific guidance throughout the whole assessment cycle.
And leading the Bureau. That sounds like a pretty massive job, balancing the science and the diplomacy.
Oh, it's huge. It's a massive diplomatic and technical role. They're essentially driving the entire assessment process.
So who's in the Bureau?
Currently, it consists of 34 members, and they're drawn from different regions to ensure global representation. It includes the chair right now, that's Jim Skee. He's a British energy scientist who was elected in July 2023. Then there are vice chairs and the co-chairs of the specialized working groups and the task force we'll talk about.
And I imagine electing that leadership is pretty political itself.
Highly political, yes. Different blocks of countries, they push hard for representation that they feel aligns with their particular climate policy interests or perspectives.
Okay, so the panel governs, the Bureau guides. What about the actual work of writing the reports? You mentioned working groups?
Right, the working groups. They are really the functional core when it comes to producing the main assessment reports. They basically divide up this colossal task of reviewing all the world's climate science into distinct, sort of manageable categories.
Makes sense. Otherwise, it'd be impossible.
Absolutely essential for efficiency. The working groups map the entire challenge onto 3 major areas, plus there's one technical group as well.
Okay, let's break those down. Working Group 1.
Working Group I, or WGI, that's the Pure Science Foundation. It assesses the physical science basis of the climate system.
So the fundamentals.
Exactly. This is the bedrock. It answers that core question, what is physically happening? It deals with things like atmospheric chemistry, the rate of warming we're observing, sea level rise data, and how certain we are about human influence. When you hear terms like climate sensitivity or carbon budgets, that's WGI territory.
Got it. Physical science. What about Working Group 2?
So Working Group 2, WGII, they shift from the what to the so what. They look at the consequences, they assess the impacts of climate change.
On people and nature.
On both human systems and natural systems, yes. Everything from food security risks, ecosystem degradation, economic damages, and critically, they also assess adaptation options.
How we cope.
Exactly. Their central question is kind of, okay, what's likely to happen and how can we prepare for it and cope with the changes? This group often gets deep into the regional differences in risk and vulnerability.
Okay, physical science, impacts, and adaptation. What's left? Working Group 3.
WGIE. You could call them the solutions group, maybe. They focus entirely on mitigation.
Mitigation meaning stopping climate change.
Pretty much. How to stop climate change by limiting greenhouse gas emissions. Their mandate is to assess how do we fix it, or at least how do we limit the damage.
So they look at energy transitions, renewables.
All of that. They analyze the technical feasibility, the economic costs and benefits, the social aspects of different options for transitioning energy systems, things like carbon capture technologies, and reducing emissions in specific sectors like transport or industry.
Right. And you mentioned a task force.
Yes, can't forget the specialized technical arm. The Task Force on National Greenhouse Gas Inventories, or TFI.
Catchy name.
Yeah. Well, maybe less visible to the public, but their job is technically vital. They develop the internationally agreed upon methodologies, the guidelines, even the software.
The countries use to measure their emissions.
Exactly. The methods countries must use to accurately estimate and report their greenhouse gas emissions and also any removals, like from forests. Without the TFI, countries couldn't reliably compare their progress or even fulfill their reporting requirements under international agreements like the Paris Agreement.
That's structural rigor. It makes sense given the sheer weight these reports carry globally.
Yeah.
But here's something you mentioned earlier that kind of blows my mind. The budget.
Yeah, the funding.
Considering its influence on, trillion-dollar economies and potentially the fate of the planet, the Ipcc operates on a shoestring budget, right?
It's quite astounding, really. The Ipcc is funded through a voluntary trust fund. It relies almost entirely on financial contributions from member governments.
How small are we talking?
Well, just to put it in perspective, in 2022, the total budget was a little less than 8 million euros.
8 million euros for the whole global operation.
For the whole thing.
That's less than the annual budget of a medium-sized university department in the U.S., isn't it? And this organization is assessing the entire globe's biggest challenge.
It's a crucial figure because it reveals the absolute reliance on voluntary labor. That small budget means they have a tiny, dedicated secretariat staff. Just a handful of people coordinating this massive global effort.
And the implication there is pretty profound, isn't it?
It is. The IPCC simply cannot afford to pay the thousands of scientists who contribute their time and expertise. This reliance on voluntary labor, it's a fundamental stress point on the whole system. It potentially skews who's even able to participate in the first place.
Right, because you need to be independently funded, right? Usually by a big research university or a government science program to be able to commit the massive amount of time required.
Exactly. If you're a brilliant scientist but working at a less well-funded institution, maybe in a developing country, the sheer time commitment might be completely prohibitive.
So who foots the bill, mostly?
Well, the top financial contributors tend to be wealthy countries like the US, Japan, France, Germany, Norway. But many developing countries contribute significantly in kind,
How does that work?
often by hosting the big plenary meetings, which still requires significant national resources, providing venues, logistics, security. The entire mechanism hinges on global goodwill and essentially the free labor of the world's top climate experts.
Okay, that reliance on goodwill and free labor brings us right to the core of how the IPCC gets its authority, doesn't it? The assessment engine itself.
Exactly. This is where those thousands of papers get forged into, well, hopefully consensus.
And here's where it gets really interesting for me. How on earth do they actually manage the logistics and the politics of turning thousands of different studies from all over the world into a single cohesive report, one that nearly every major government on Earth ultimately signs off on?
It all starts with the authors. We've established that thousands of scientists work voluntarily.
Yeah, hundreds, maybe thousands of
Yeah.
hours over that 6 or 7 year cycle.
Easily. Over 3,000 different authors have contributed since the IPCC was created. And this time commitment, it's enormous. It often seriously disrupts the scientists' own primary research back at their home institutions.
Which brings us back to that question. Does the lack of pay fundamentally skew who can participate? It really sounds like a system that favors established, well-resourced experts, maybe over early career researchers or those from less wealthy nations.
That's a very widely acknowledged concern. It's a real issue. The IPCC does try to mitigate this through a very deliberate selection process for authors.
How does that work? Who picks the authors?
Well, it starts with governments and official observer organizations like scientific bodies or environmental groups submitting lists of nominees, potential experts. But the final selection, that's made by the working group co-chairs and the bureau leadership.
And what are they looking for?
Scientific excellence is obviously the primary requirement, but they also rigorously pursue diversity. They aim for geographical balance, making sure experts from developing nations are included alongside those from developed nations. They look for a diversity of scientific viewpoints within the field, gender balance, and also a mix of experienced IPCC veterans and new authors bringing fresh perspectives.
Feels like a complex balancing act.
It is, and it's often fraught with quite a bit of behind-the-scenes negotiation and lobbying.
Okay, so once the authors are selected, they face this massive task of synthesis. What kind of information are they actually allowed to use for this global assessment?
Their primary mandate is clear. Prioritize published, peer-reviewed scientific sources. That's the most robust, most carefully vetted science available.
But not only peer-reviewed stuff.
Not exclusively, no. They are permitted, and sometimes it's actually necessary for them to refer to what's known as gray literature.
Gray literature, what's that?
That includes things like high-quality reports from government agencies or studies from non-governmental organizations, maybe technical reports from industry associations, or even specific, complex computer model results that haven't gone through formal peer review yet.
But using that gray literature sounds tricky. Didn't the IPCC get burned by that in the past?
Oh, absolutely. There was a major controversy around that. The guidelines for using gray literature now are extremely strict. They require really high standards of scrutiny, transparency about the source, and traceability, basically. You need to be able to check where the information came from. That was a direct response to past controversies, which we should definitely talk about later.
Don't.
But the key principle for authors is maintaining objectivity. Their job is to synthesize the science as it exists. It's explicitly not to advocate for particular policies based on that science.
And that strict timeline we talked about.
Yeah.
That's the absolute dictator here, isn't it? If some groundbreaking paper gets published, say, a month after the cutoff date for AR6.
Tough luck. It has to wait 6 or 7 years for the start of the 7th assessment report cycle.
Wow. And that delay must contribute to that perception we discussed, that the reports can sometimes feel a bit conservative or like they're lagging behind the absolute cutting edge of research?
It's an inherent limitation of the system's structure. It takes time to do this comprehensively. The synthesis process itself is incredibly intense. A typical chapter in one of the reports is developed by a team you'll have played. You'll have coordinating lead authors, maybe 10 or 15 lead authors, and then a larger group of contributing authors feeding in specific expertise.
And they graph the chapter. Then what? How is it checked?
They develop drafts, and those drafts are then rigorously scrutinized through a mandatory multi-stage review process. This is crucial for the credibility.
Okay, let's detail that review process, because that sounds like the engine that generates the authority, right?
It really is. For the main assessment reports, there are 3 formal review stages. Stage 1 is the expert review.
Just scientists looking at it?
Exactly. The initial draft chapters are circulated exclusively to external experts and researchers all around the world. Anyone with relevant expertise can sign up to be an expert reviewer. And they submit comments, critiques, suggestions. Thousands of comments usually come in.
Okay, stage 1, experts. What's next?
Stage 2 is the government and expert review. Now, the revised draft chapters, along with, and this is crucial, the first draft of the summary for policymakers, or SPM.
Ah, the SPM. That's the bit the politicians actually read.
That's the most high-profile part, yes. So that revised draft report and the first draft SPM are reviewed simultaneously by both governments and another round of experts.
Getting government input that early? That's fascinating. It must ensure governments are sort of aware of the findings before they're totally finalized, maybe reduces political surprises later on.
It's definitely strategic. It brings them into the process early. Now, the final formal stage is the government review. This focuses just on the revised summary for policymakers.
Okay. But you mentioned something earlier, the most intriguing detail, the part that guarantees absolute governmental buy-in.
Ah, yes. That happens at the closing plenary session for the approval of the SPM.
That's the famous line-by-line negotiation, isn't it?
It is. It's a truly remarkable and often incredibly tense process. Government representatives, these are often diplomats, technical staff, maybe ministry officials, and lead authors of the report physically sit together in a room, sometimes for days, even running over schedule.
And they go through the summary for policymakers, line by line, word by word.
Literally line by line, sometimes word by word. The text must be agreed upon by consensus of all 195 governments present. Any single government can hold up the process if they object strongly to a particular phrasing.
Wow. So that ensures that when that SPM is finally released, those 195 governments